Greetings, this is Amy Wentley with Chi Knuckles Knitting, and this is episode 26, the Ebbie Sweater, finishing the cuffs. This is the fifth of a series of 5 videos on how to finish the Ebbie cardigan. This will be talking about how to finish the cuff on the sweater. The previous 4 covered how to join the right and left bands for the neck, how to join those bands to the back of the sweater, how to do the side seams, and how to do the sleeve seams. So for this video, we are going to be working on finishing off the cuff of the sweater. When you got to the end of the sleeve, you were told to either put the stitches on waste yarn or to loosely bind off. In my case, I put them on waste yarn, and what you are going to do is you're actually going to fold this cuff along this purl bump line. This is a row of knits and purls that happens on the whole sleeve. So after you finish this row, the pattern instructed you to knit 5 more rows, and that was for this cuff. So you're going to be folding the cuff over along that line of knit and purl stitches. So in order to actually seam it, we're going to have to turn the sleeve inside out, because we're going to be sewing whip stitching on the inside of the cuff. So here we go. This is the sleeve turned inside out, and we are going to fold the cuff over towards the inside. Like this. And I like the idea of starting and ending my seam at the sleeve seam here. It's just a good place to kind of start and then wind up your stitches and tie it off at the end. So we're going to start by threading a piece of yarn onto a darning needle. And as I explained in earlier videos, I'm using the project yarn, the dapple that Brooklyn Tweed recommends. You could be using sock yarn if you'd like. Now, if you bound off your stitches at the cuff, you'll follow these same steps, except every time I pick up a stitch from my sleeve from this waste yarn, you'll be picking up a bound off stitch. That's the only difference. So I'm going to reorient this a little bit, and I'm going to zoom in so you can see a little better. And I actually think I would like to have most of my sweater over to my right side here. That ought to work well for me because I will be stitching this way. And then I'm going to zoom in. Okay, so I'm going to start at the first stitch, and this is my first stitch here. I have my 2 ends of my waste yarn. This is one end. This is the other end. And one thing you're going to want to make sure of is, especially if you have this on waste yarn, you want to make sure that you get every single stitch that was on your waste yarn. One thing that can happen is sometimes your stitches can sort of suck in the waste yarn. So you just want to make sure and go through it and be sure that you have individual stitches there that you're going to be able to pick up. You need to pick up each one on this cuff. If you don't, you're actually going to be leaving that stitch available to run, to actually drop. So make sure you get each one. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to put my needle through 1 stitch on the waste yarn. And at this point I'm having to deal with a lot of tails and things here, so just try to keep them all out of the way. And I'm going to leave a tail that I can weave in later. And I'm going to come down and I'm just going to very gently, well, on this first stitch I can actually take a stitch from the seam here. and pull through. There you go. And then I will go to the second stitch on my waist yarn. And this time I'm going to go to a stitch down on the fabric, actually on the sleeve, and I'm going to go ahead and select a purl bump to stitch through. And I'm just going to want to be aware as I go across here that I stay in this same row of purl bumps as I'm picking up, just so I don't get off kilter. So, and I'm going to decide to, I talked to you about smiles and frowns before, but it's kind of hard to see. If you turn your head, this is a smile, this is a frown, this is a smile, this is a frown. I'm going to go into smiles this time, so I'm going to pick up this one and pull through. And that's one stitch. And then go ahead, you can tug it now. No reason to keep that loose. I'm going to go to my third stitch, pull through, and then I'm going to go down and I'm going to find the next smile, which is here. Okay, and I'm going to take my fourth stitch, my cuff. So I'll just be alternating back and forth between smiles and stitches on the cuff. So here's the stitch. And here is a smile. And here's a stitch. And the next smile here. And what you want to do actually is to keep your yarn. Let's see how I can tell you to do this. Take the next stitch, and then you'll want to make sure before you take the next stitch that your yarn is actually above, so that you don't make little knots along the way. I think this is right. Nope, that was wrong. You're going to want to make sure your yarn is below. So let me try that this time. You just don't want to be making little knots here. So I'm going to go ahead and put it through the cuff, and then I'm going to bring my yarn below, down here, and I'm going to take the next stitch on the cuff and pull through. And that will keep it from knotting. So keep your yarn below after you pick up the stitch on the cuff. There you go. And check for little knots and such. Then I'm going to take this yarn and make sure it's below, and then I will get the next stitch on the cuff. So I am going to go ahead and pause the recording, and I will get back when I am close to the end on the other side, and I'll show you how to finish up. Hi, I'm back, and I'm close to the end now, and I just wanted to point out that once you get going with doing this, you can really get into a cadence where you pick up a smile and grab a stitch off the waist yarn. Whoops. There's another tail getting in the way. And pick up a smile, and that tail just wants to come along on everything. And pick up a stitch on the waist yarn and a smile and a stitch at the same time. That's when you really get going and you're feeling like you can go a little faster. I apologize. My sweater is a really light color, and I know it's a little hard to see on the video. And also, let me get this light a little out of the way too. It's kind of hard to balance the lighting so that I can see and the lighting so that you can see. But okay, so I'm coming up and I'm very close to the end. I have 1, 2, 3 stitches left on waste yarn. So I'm going to come ahead and work these last 3 stitches. 1, and it might be a little bit hard to find the smiles and everything as you get this close. That last stitch I'm going to take in the seam here. So this is my last stitch on my waste yarn right here. And I'm just going to go ahead and dip into a stitch on the seam and then that last stitch on my waste yarn and pull that tight. And then when I get to the end here, I'm just going to do the old trick of I'm going to put my yarn in on I'm going to do one side of the seam. I'm going to go through this first stitch on my waste yarn, go through the seam a little bit, pick up a little bit there, and then maybe go through the last stitch on my waste yarn one more time. And when I pull the yarn through, that's going to make a loop here. See this loop? And I'm just going to put my needle back through that loop and pull, and it'll make a little knot there. And then I will cut my yarn and I will weave in the ends. And so that's the last of finishing up the Ebbie sweater. At this point, you're going to weave in all your ends and then cut them. And then I'll also need to snip out all my markers and take out all my markers and such. And once you finish the sweater, you are going to want to block it one more time to the pattern dimensions that are in the pattern, or if you made modifications to whatever modifications you made. And then you will have a wonderful sweater that you're ready to wear. So that's the last in this series. I thank you for sticking with me on these, and I will see you in future videos. Bye-bye.